Welcome to the Shame-Free Sex Podcast. I'm your host, Brielle Starr from shamefreesex.com. By tuning in today, you are taking your next bold step towards fully embracing your authentic sexual self, absolutely shame-free. It's time to take your power back from shame and experience the life of your dreams, both in the bedroom and beyond. Let's embark on this transformative, shame-free journey together. Hello, everyone. I'm Brielle Starr, your host for the Shame-Free Sex Podcast, and today I am joined by a leading international expert in female pleasure, the fabulous Mangala Holland. Mangala is a women's sexual confidence and orgasm coach and the author of the #1 best-selling book, Orgasms Made Easy, the no-nonsense guide to self-pleasure, sexual confidence, and female orgasms. Today, Mangala will be enlightening us all about living orgasmically. We're going to be learning about self-pleasure, shame-free orgasms, and everything in between. If you are feeling a little in the dark when it comes to orgasms and self-pleasure, this episode is definitely for you. I am so ready to get orgasmic with this orgasmic conversation today, Mangala. Thank you so much for being here with me.
Oh, thank you, Brielle. I'm really excited to be here and happy to dive in. Yeah, I think it's going to be really awesome for our audience today.
Yeah, definitely. I always love speaking with you, and we've spoken together on Avaya a lot of times, so I can't wait to be speaking with you on the podcast today. And you are always so interesting and so inspiring with all of your orgasmic knowledge. So before we get into the nitty-gritty details, I'd love if we could learn a little bit more about you and your own journey. Could you tell us about what led you into becoming an orgasm coach and why you continue to do all of this fabulous work?
Yeah, great question. So back in the old days, I'm 52 now, but back in my previous life, I was working in corporate. I was working in stockbrokers, and I was traveling around the UK, rolling out software development and software training for stockbrokers. And so I was in this it was a really stiff kind of job, as you can probably imagine. And in my spare time, I was a DJ and I was playing house and techno and hip hop in bars and nightclubs in my city, which was Manchester at the time. And so I did this for a number of years. And essentially, I got to the point where I burnt out because I felt like I was really leading this really double life. I wasn't feeling fulfilled. I was going out and getting wasted every single weekend. What I didn't realize underneath that, and this only came out as I started my healing journey, was that I had so much shame and I was really disconnected from my body and from my pleasure. And my love life was a disaster. It was just a string of drunken one night stands, and I was looking for validation in basically all of the wrong places. And so it got to the point where I burnt out and I realized I had to do something about it. And I got sober, and I basically, once I got sober, I was like, all right, I'm really unhappy with my life. I've just been going out, getting wasted at the weekend, earning good money, but then just blowing it up the wall at the weekend because I felt really unfulfilled. And so I decided to take a year off and go traveling. And on that, as soon as I got out of England and I started traveling, I was like, I need to really do the deep healing journey. I need to get to the bottom of why I'm feeling so disconnected and why I'm just not feeling fulfilled and happy, which was quite a privilege to be able to do that. But I was in my late 30s at the time. And so I started doing yoga and meditation, and I went to India. And during my time there, I started on this healing journey. I realized that, oh, wow, I actually hated myself. I hated my body. I'd felt so disconnected. I realized I had so much shame, and so much of it was sexual shame. I was like, oh, I really need to address this. And I started to do some inner work, and I went deep into neo tantra, and I ended up in an environment where I started learning all of this stuff about sexuality. And it was, at the time, it was mind blowing for me. It was revolutionary. And I had my first cervical orgasm. And and if with the when I was at this center in Thailand actually, and it was just like, oh my God, I had no idea that my body was capable of feeling this. And I didn't even know cervical orgasms existed. I'd never heard of them, and I was nearly 40, and I was like, oh my God, why are we not taught this stuff? Everybody's capable of experiencing this. And I just wanted to kind of shout it from the rooftops. And that was kind of the start of me wanting to be in this field, wanting to let people know what their bodies were capable of. And especially having come from like this repressed English background where people don't talk about sex, everybody's really stuffy, and there's all these double standards, particularly for women. And it was just like it was the most liberating thing for me, and that was like the missing piece of the puzzle as far as my own personal healing was concerned. And so I started training in neo tantra. I was already a yoga teacher by that point. I carried on going deep into my personal journey, and I started working with women. And it was really transformative. And then I stayed in that environment for a long time. I was there for 5 years in the end. And I unfortunately realized that it was a really manipulative environment. It was really culty. There was a lot of coercive control. There's a lot of manipulation of women and a lot of sexual abuse in the name of polarity and empowerment. It was very distorted. And as I came out of that environment, I was like, well, I want to bang the drum about female pleasure, and I want women to be able to empower themselves in this incredible pleasure, because it is the source of our power and our confidence. And at the same time, I want women to be able to access this safely without experiencing the harm and the damage that I experienced and that other women in that environment experienced. And so that really helped me create the body of work that I've been teaching for 12 years now. And I've lived all over the world. I've worked all over the world. I've worked with thousands of women and vulva owners to help them become confident in their sexuality, to help them overcome the shame and the disconnection and the shutdown and the grief and the guilt and the trauma and all of these things that hold us back. And it's been absolutely transformational. It really has. And it's so wonderful to see people really claiming their power. And it became clear to me that this body of work really needs to be taught in a way that is slow, steady, gentle, accessible, that you can do 5-10 minutes of movement regularly is going to help you reconnect with your body. So I took a really embodied approach to this. It's not about pushing people into intensive experiences, because I experienced that and it did more harm than good. So it's really trauma informed, and it's incredible to see the results in people. It really is. Yeah. So that's the short answer of how I got into this work.
Yes. Wow. I loved hearing your story. I don't think I've heard it in that much depth before, and
Mm,
everything that took course and led you to where you are today. And I really love when you were just now describing your work and how you go about it and your approach. I think that's really inspiring as well. I love how you described it as being approachable and
mhm.
not too forward, especially for people who are really early on their journey and haven't explored a lot. I think that's so important to go slow and meet yourself where you're at and not push yourself into anything too difficult or too aggressive or anything like that. And
Yeah.
yeah, hearing your story and hearing how you had so much sexual shame and guilt and self-hatred, essentially, I think so many people can relate to that on all different levels. I know I still work with that, and I still work with working with that within myself. And so, when it comes to sexual shame specifically, what did you do to work on letting go of your sexual shame? And what can anyone listening today, for myself and for others, do to really start working and addressing our sexual shame?
Yeah. Oh, great question. And for a lot of us, it runs deep. So I noticed for myself there were layers to it. I hadn't realized the negative self-talk that I was constantly engaging with. I'd look in the mirror and I'd be really critical about my body. If I was in bed with somebody, I'd feel it's that thing of like the fear of like, am I being too much? or am I not being enough? Like, I think this is thing of like, how do we get it right? And I think that this is the double standards that really, set us up to feel that we're never going to get it right. I was slut shamed when I was a teenager, and that really stayed with me. It was like the bullying that I experienced at school as a result of that experience was so deep. And so it was only, I mean, it was a slow process of unraveling it. And it was partly starting to recognize where I was talking to myself. It's like I'd taken on all these other voices of people who were, the playground bullies and the idiots that I'd slept with who would sleep with me and then be really derogatory about me afterwards and this kind of stuff. As I got more into my body and as I started to access genuine, authentic pleasure and feel it from the inside out and start to really be attuned with all of my body, not just my genitals, it was like I started to develop healthy boundaries as well. And it's like, oh, okay, I'm not okay with this. I'm not okay with that. And that was a really powerful part of the process. And so I just started to practice being more kind to myself. And this is a side process, but it was really, really important. Um, and as I started to experience more pleasure and realize that it was something I could generate from the inside out, and that I wasn't relying on someone else to give me an orgasm, it's mine. If I want to have an orgasm, I can claim it for myself, I can give it to myself. It really transformed everything. And I stopped making poor choices. My standards went up when it came to who I was dating and interacting with. It transformed everything. So it's like this so steady journey. And I had to start to love my body as well. And that started from feeling good from the inside out. And so that it was like, well, what can I feel? What feels good when I move? What feels good when I touch? These kind of things, rather than what are people looking at me like, how do they think I look, and I had to also dismantle a lot of fat phobia within that. I had to really reevaluate so many of these things, and it was a slow steady process. And there's still things that are confronting, as that is for everybody. I think when you think you've got a handle on self-love, and then you put on weight or you get older, and we don't stay the same. And so it's a constant practice of leaning in and every day saying, no, I'm going to put myself first. I'm going to love and I'm going to cherish myself. And if people don't like it, they can step away. And yeah, it's a journey. It really is.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think you explained that so beautifully. I love the way that you described the journey and the different aspects of it, and coming back to that self-compassion whenever we can, and our
Mm,
self-awareness about what we're feeling, what we want, what we desire.
yeah.
And you mentioned how you experienced some slut shaming, and I would imagine so many people can relate to that, even if they were barely sexual or very sexual. It's just a very common thing that so many women experience.
Mm,
And I know for me, I didn't experience it much in my outside world, but I definitely was slut shaming myself a lot in my younger sexual experiences. And that was a big block for me and my journey. And it was always running in the background of my experiences. And it's something I continue to work on. And I would describe that for me as a block. And you've mentioned some other things that could be considered blocks. Could you tell us some other common blocks to pleasure and orgasms that people might be experiencing?
yeah, absolutely. So shame is such a big one. Um, but all of these can sometimes feed in with each other. So it's not like, sometimes when I kind of share what I see as some of the common blocks to pleasure, common obstacles, people might have one or two that really stand out. And then other people, when I share them, they're like, oh yeah, it's that. Yep, resonate with
Mhm.
all of them. So shame is a big one. Guilt is a big one as well. And guilt and shame are a bit different, actually. And I work with a lot of particularly women who feel guilty for putting their needs first, or it's like, oh, I should be doing something more productive than focusing on my pleasure. I've got to deal with all of these other things first. I've got family to attend to, I've got work, there's all of these other things. And it's like, then you get to the end of the day and oh, guess what? You're too exhausted. And, it's like, oh, I'll leave it to another day. So guilt can be a really sneaky one. And I think it's really important to bring awareness to it. Trauma, of course, is a massive one. It doesn't necessarily have to be sexual trauma as well. Trauma in general, whether it's with a capital T or whether it's, things that something that seemed fairly minor at the time, but is still with you from a long time ago. The subtle things can really impact us as well. Stress is also a massive one, and stress can be a huge impact. It can have a huge impact on your libido. It can really give you that feeling that you can't cope, that you haven't got enough bandwidth, that there's just not enough juice in the tank, that you're running on empty or you're running on fumes. So that can be a major passion killer. And I think also relationship dynamics as well. There was some statistics that I read recently. I can't remember the exact stats, but it was like the number of women who listed their number one obstacle to sex as being too exhausted was something like 65, 70%. It was really high. And I think that's really interesting that that can have such a major impact. So yeah, there's some really big ones, and they do all interact with each other in certain ways. I'm sure people listening to this are thinking, oh yeah, actually some of these resonate with me. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, I appreciate you sharing some of those common blocks so that people who were maybe wondering why they were experiencing a block can now hear some of the different things that are very common and maybe
Yeah.
perhaps, yeah, connect with them and realize what might be going on for them.
Yeah, there's other
And
ones as well. Like, I'm just thinking, like the community that we grew up in, and that our upbringing. Even though my parents are fairly laid back, my dad was still an ex-Catholic, so there was still this, and I was still brought up with a strong idea of what was considered acceptable behavior and what wasn't, and how nice girls should behave, and no boys in your bedroom, no sex before marriage, all of these things. And it was always made clear to me that if I ever got pregnant, I would be out on my ear, and that would be it. And so these messages go in deep. Other things as well, just like we're not given the information. Nobody teaches us about how to pleasure yourself or how to have amazing orgasms or what our bodies are capable of. And I had to wait till I was nearly 40 to start exploring this stuff. And that can be a huge obstacle for a lot of people.
yeah. Yeah, definitely. The background and what we grew up with and the stories that we were told can so
Mm.
deeply affect us, even if we don't realize. I know as I get older, I realize more and more all of the things that happened that I didn't realize are still affecting me. When I was younger, my parents were divorced when I got quite young, and on my father's side and my stepmom's side, I received amazing sexual empowerment and teaching. And then on the side, when I was with my mother, she was very non-sexual, very anti-sexuality in a sense. And that definitely played a role having those two polars. And I didn't know where to fall in the middle of that. And being a
Mm.
very sexual person, it was hard seeing my mother and seeing someone who had so many issues with sex. And I felt shame sometimes for feeling like I didn't feel that way. I didn't feel like my mother.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's such a range of things there that can be affecting us. I know that in my own life.
Mhm.
And for some women, I know that these blocks can affect their ability to have orgasms at all. Perhaps they have never had an orgasm or don't think they've had an orgasm.
Yeah.
For anyone feeling that way, is it possible for any woman to have an orgasm, or is it something only some women can do? Because I know that's a common myth.
Oh, yeah, that's a question I get all the time. And I'll hear some people say, I've worked with so many clients, and they'll say, oh, I must be wired differently to everybody else. There
Hmm.
must be something wrong with me. Everybody else is having these amazing experiences, and I'm the only one who's struggling. And I'm like, no, everybody I speak to pretty much, wants more than what they're experiencing. Either they've not experienced orgasm at all, or they can only experience orgasm when they're on their own and not through penetration with a partner. That's really common. Or they just feel like, there should be something more, but I just don't know what that is or how to get there. And somebody recently described it as like, if you imagine like a manual car, a stick shift, that you're stuck in first or second gear, and there's all of these other gears,
Hmm.
but you don't know how to actually get there. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah,
it's so
definitely.
Mm,
Yeah, I think
yeah,
you described that so well, that being feeling like there's something more, but not knowing what it is or not knowing how to get there.
yeah,
Especially, yeah, if we've grown up not being taught about these things, we might feel like there's something, but if we have no thoughts or no teaching to tell us that it's out there, then it's hard to actually move forward towards it. So that's why I'm so glad that you're here sharing with us today. And
thank you.
yeah, and let's come around to self-pleasure. You've talked about that a little
Mhm.
bit, and we have talked about how a lot of people have some different stories and things that they've been told growing up around that. Could you tell us about why self-pleasure is so important?
Oh yeah, it really is. I think if we want to really know what our body is capable of experiencing, it is so much easier to explore that for yourself often. Um, to really just be in that journey of discovery, because this way you get to take as long as you like. You get to go at a speed that works for you rather than whatever works for your partner. You're not trying to please somebody else or keep them happy. You don't have to go into performance mode and pretend to be something you're not. It can be a much more honest, authentic experience. Now, some people will also say, yeah, but you're not getting that chemistry from the other person that gives you something to work with and bounce off. But I think it is so, so, so important. And partners can come and go in our lives. Even if we're in the best relationship, most fulfilling relationship, we never know what's around the corner. And it's so important that we learn what our bodies are capable of, and that we give ourselves this opportunity to explore that for ourselves. And I really see it as it's like this fundamental sense of at this level of sexual feeling and pleasure and bliss, and on a deep somatic level and on a nervous system level and everything else, it's like you're basically saying to yourself, I matter and I'm prioritizing my well-being. It's that basic. It's like, we put time into going to the gym, to doing yoga, to whatever else we do, whether it's running or these things that we do because we know they're good for us, and they're going to enhance our well-being, and they're going to reduce our stress levels, and we're going to get, whether it's endorphins or whatever, we're going to get feel-good chemicals in our system, and we know it's good for us. It's no different with sex, and it's this really deep core part of us. And for a long time, for me, I didn't know anything more than a clitoral orgasm. And so I'd come home from a night out, wasted, and I'd be wired. And having a clitoral orgasm was my way of kind of discharging some energy so I could roll over and go to sleep. Nothing wrong with that. That's fine. That's awesome. And at the same time, there is so much more that is available. And when we start to explore ourselves in this deeper, more intimate way, particularly giving ourselves the kind of touch that we perhaps really would like to receive from another, but perhaps for whatever reason, we've not got a partner, or the partner we're with doesn't quite know how to give us what we want, or sometimes they get it right and sometimes they don't. This is where we really get to give ourselves exactly as we want it, and we also get to experiment as well. Um, it really is just like the cornerstone for everything. And once you can experience certain states of pleasure and certain types of orgasm for yourself, it starts to unlock something so that then it's much more accessible when you're with a partner as well. And you start to really understand, this is what I need to get aroused. This is what I need to keep things bubbling. This is what I need to experience an orgasm. And that is, it's such it's knowledge is power, and putting it into practice regularly is imperative. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the emphasis you have on the importance of self-pleasure. And I think it's so important as well. I love self-pleasure and I started the practice when I was quite young and I've continued with it. And there's
Mhm.
always so much more to explore
Yeah.
and learn, especially I know you talk a lot about cervical orgasms and you mentioned that
Mhm.
earlier. I actually don't know much about cervical orgasms. Could you tell us some more about that and how we can have one? Especially for me, I'm ready to go practice right after this.
Sure. So cervical orgasms feel quite a bit different to your average clitoral experience. So if you imagine, like, for those of you who have clitoral orgasms, you imagine there's like this building, 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 building. There's like tension that builds up in your body. You might be squeezing quite tightly as you get close, and then when you experience an orgasm, often it's like these intense contractions. It's like a peak experience, and then it's like, okay, that's done. It's game over, and the energy kind of dissipates. It's like, right, okay, I'm done. Even if you can have another one or two after that, it does become more difficult. But they're normally quite a specific kind of feeling. With a cervical orgasm, it's very different. It can feel a lot softer. It can feel like it's more of like a wave. It can feel like a more full-bodied experience. Sometimes in the beginning, it can feel more subtle, and everybody describes them a bit differently as well. So it is like one of my clients had her first cervical orgasm last week, and she said it was like it was beyond words. It was that's the best way I can describe it, which is not so helpful. But it's like this, it can feel like you're in an altered state, like it's quite cosmic, like almost like you're at one with the universe. And that it feels like a very emotionally fulfilling experience, and it can go on for a lot longer as well. It's like you can cut, it's like peaks and valleys, and you can stay in it. So there's these waves that come and go, and you kind of think, oh, okay, I'm coming off that wave, I'm done, and it's, oh no, it's building again. And it's quite amazing, that can happen like that. And it does require some regular exploration and some perhaps regular practice to get there. It's much easier if you've got a dildo or a wand or something that you can make that connection, because it comes from stimulation on your cervix. So you really, to be able to have that stimulation on your cervix is what's going to eventually kind of help everything to wake up there. You may find that initially your cervix doesn't have much sensation. It might be numb or might feel a bit sensitive, or sometimes it's a sense like, oh wow, this feels really vulnerable emotionally. So it's about going slow, listening to your body. And if it does feel numb or that you're not feeling much, just know that over time, with some practice, it can wake up and it can become more pleasurable, and eventually it can become orgasmic. And something that people will often say to me when they've experienced their first cervical orgasm is, oh, I had this once before with a lover and I never knew what it was. It was just this crazy experience, and I've never been able to, it happens one time and never happened again. And it's like their body has this kind of deep knowing,
Mm.
and this deep remembering, and it's really beautiful.
Yeah, it sounds so beautiful. I loved hearing some more about that and getting a better understanding of it
Mhm.
and how we can all have one, anyone listening today. And so then beyond just cervical orgasms, are there any other types of orgasms that you would suggest people explore beyond just clitoral orgasms?
I mean, there's lots of different pleasure spots inside in the vaginal canal. So yeah, we've got the cervix. We've also got the G spot, or the G zone, as it's often called. And there's still discussions within the scientific community as to whether it even exists, and if it does exist, is it part of the clitoris, but just the internal bit? on the inner walls rather than the external. Um, but the stimulation there does feel very different, and orgasms from that stimulation can again feel more like these waves as well, and can stay in that a lot longer. So that's really interesting. And there are other pleasure spots inside that can also feel really amazing, and some people can experience orgasms from. And so that is, there's also the A spot, which is further up the front wall. And then on the back wall, there's a couple of spots. There's the K spot, which is lower down near the entrance, and then the P spot, which is higher up near the cervix. So there's some. People will also talk about anal orgasms. There's this, you can talk about energy orgasms and full body orgasms. So there's people will talk about different numbers of orgasms. So sometimes I think it's helpful to talk about orgasmic states instead of like what is the specific area that is being stimulated, because you could be in an orgasmic state from eating like a really amazing piece of chocolate if you're in the right zone, if it's giving you all of those feelings, and if you're doing it really mindfully and you're able to stay with intense levels of pleasure, if you've awoken lots of channels of pleasure in your body, then everything kind of gets amplified. So there's no kind of endpoint. And what's lovely about the female body is, as you kind of said earlier, there's always something more to discover, and pleasure is infinite, and no two orgasms are the same, which is really cool.
Yeah, no two orgasms are the same. That is for
Mm.
sure. And yeah, I love this idea of just really connecting to our pleasure and being orgasmic in any given moment. I know food, yeah, I love food and candy. I can feel so orgasmic in those moments. Is there anything else you could share with us about orgasmic states? How can people connect with that or realize that they're experiencing it, really come into that?
Yeah, there's something I'd really like to mention here is that I think slowing down is really, really important, and really staying present to all of the little micro sensations that you can experience in any given moment. And that really requires really being really slowing down and being mindful. So this is why, particularly with cervical orgasms and any of the internal orgasms, you're more likely to experience this if you're going for a bit longer, and also if you've had a lot of foreplay and you're really warmed up first. Like, those are really, really important things. And then when it comes to orgasmic states, it's like a natural extension of that. It's like really being present to every little thing you can feel. And if you are somebody, like we talked about blocks to pleasure earlier, like one of the things people often say is, I'm stuck in my head. I can't connect into my body. This is really a challenge. And it's really starting to train yourself to feel more, to sensitize, to notice what you can feel and stay with that. That is the best practice in, working towards orgasmic states. And I think the other thing here is that sometimes we have these experiences, and because of the way we've been socialized, that we kind of talk ourselves out of it, and we question ourselves, we question our own experience. And so sometimes my clients will say, well, I think that was my cervix that I was stimulating, or I think that might have been an orgasm, but I don't know. And I was like, well, what if you give yourself permission to just own that, and say, yes, it was. Like, what happens then? And then it's much easier. It's like next time you explore, it's like, okay, now I know what an orgasm feels like. So then it becomes much easier to, like, you're starting to really rewire your brain and your nervous system, your neural pathways, to say, yeah, this is an orgasmic experience. And then it becomes much easier to stay in it, to play with it, to amplify it, to revel in it longer, all of these things. So yeah, can take a bit of patience. But I think more than anything, just being open and being curious. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, definitely being open and curious. And once we find, yeah, that awareness of what we're feeling, we're able to work with it more. And I think that stories that we're perhaps telling ourselves or things that we believe, perhaps if things are supposed to be a certain way, if it's not
Mhm.
that way, we might be unaware of what just happened. We might be unaware we had a cervical orgasm because we
Yeah.
either don't know that it exists or we tell ourselves it's supposed to be a certain way. So I think really de-armoring and letting go of some of those beliefs could be really helpful for us to actually be able to actively explore and get more curious and really embody and feel what we are feeling.
Yeah, and you just mentioned de-armoring there, and I just want to also highlight that I think something that's really, really important is that if you want to experience more of these deeper states of bliss, then really spending time not just self-pleasuring, but exploring internally very gently and noticing, other areas that feel numb, other areas that feel more sensation, other areas that feel pleasure, and starting to map internally what's there. And if something does feel numb, spending time just really gently massaging it. And then maybe next time you go back, maybe it's not so numb. There's over time, everything can really start to wake up. And that is one of the key things to experiencing way more pleasure and more satisfying orgasms as well. Yeah.
Hmm. Yeah, I think it can be quite frightening or scary to
Mhm.
find a part of ourselves that is numb and then consider exploring that. I think it's really
Mhm.
easy to be numb in our
Yeah.
society beyond just sexual aspects, just being numb in general. And
Yeah.
so I think it's really empowering to start this journey and do this work and explore where we're numb. And it can also be very scary as well. So, what would you say for anyone who is feeling a little bit nervous about exploring, whether that means just exploring and practicing working towards more orgasms or the practice of de-armoring things like that that might have a lot of
Yeah.
emotions.
I think the number one thing that I want everyone to take away from this is safety is the foundation for amazing pleasure. And it's really, this is what all of my work is about, is that how can we create as much safety as possible in your body, in your nervous system, a sense of safety emotionally. When that is in place, then we can start to do the work of thawing out, working through numbness, starting to heighten sensations, working towards cultivating pleasure and working towards cultivating orgasms. Like, that is the roadmap that I work with. And it really needs that foundation of as much safety as possible. So this is where the taking the baby steps, going steady, rather than, like, if you're completely new to this and it's sounding confronting, then diving in and going, right, I'm gonna work inside my vagina and I'm gonna clear every bit of numbness inside, like, you know, go slow. Like, start doing some dance or some movement first, so that you start to feel that you're getting into your body, and maybe exploring that for a bit, maybe exploring some self-touch and the rest of your body, or some breast massage, or exploring your labia, the external areas, your vulva, and really listening to get a yes before you do any kind of internal exploration. Start to get used to listening and checking in, like, do I want to proceed? Am I ready for this? Is my body saying yes to this? Like, those are the really key things, and that's really gonna that's absolutely fundamental. Yeah. So if anyone's listening to this and they're thinking, whoa, this sounds really edgy, it's all about the baby steps. And baby steps, little baby steps, are going to take you so much further in the long run. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it comes back around to that patience that you've mentioned a few times today, being
Yeah.
patient with ourselves, not rushing ourselves on our journey, no matter where you're at in your exploration. So I really appreciate you bring that around once again, how important it is to be patient and kind with ourselves and not push ourselves to states we aren't ready for. That will more than likely just create more numbness, more trauma, and
Yeah.
things like that for ourselves. So that's not what we want to be doing. We want to be
Yeah.
yeah, being compassionate with ourselves and taking care of ourselves.
Mhm.
And as we reach the end of our time together, Mangala, I would love for you to share about how people can work with you and the services you offer for anyone who's ready to dive deeper and explore more, whether that means cervical orgasms or anything on the spectrum of your work.
Yeah, sure. So on my website, I mean, there's a few different ways to work with me. my website, which I'm sure you'll share the details of, it's mangalaholland.com. If you go to mangalaholland.com/SSS, so 3 S's, you can get my free 3-part video series called From Shutdown to Essential Satisfaction. That's a really simple way in as an introduction to my work. But I do one-to-one coaching over 6 months for people who really want to overcome their sexual blocks and really do that work with as much support as possible to become confident and empowered and orgasmic. I also do group programs. I do a facilitator training once a year, and I have a low-cost membership which might be really beneficial for people in this group. It's called O Club. You'll find the details on my website. And I also have a #1 best-selling book, as you mentioned at the beginning, called Orgasms Made Easy. You'll find the details for that on my website. It's also available on Amazon. Yeah, I'm up to a lot of stuff, but I really want to support people, whatever level they're at. That's really important.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing about your work, sharing about how people can work with you. I love the color and cover of your book, by the way. It's
Thank
gorgeous, the
you.
strawberry. So yeah, thank you just once again for doing all the work that you do and offering the services that you provide. I think it's so lovely that people can have access to this information that they likely didn't grow up learning, or even if they are an adult, they might still not be aware of a lot of this knowledge. So I think it's wonderful that there's people out there like you.
Oh, thank you. You know, it's like I recently started working with someone and she struggled her entire life. And she's like, I never knew people like you existed. I didn't know there was someone out there who could help me. You know,
Mhm.
and I think, wow, it's never too late. Like my oldest clients are in their mid-70s and they're having the best sex and pleasure of their lives. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's so important too. It's never too late. You don't have to, just because you're 30 or 40 or 20 or
Yeah.
60, you don't have to give up on this journey. It's never too late, no matter what age or stage you're at in your life. I think that's so important to keep in mind as well for anyone listening today. And we
Yeah.
also don't need to have shame, whether you're 60 or 20. You don't have to have shame about where you're at in your journey either.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And as a reminder for all of our listeners, you can click the link in the show notes and head over to Mangala's website to explore more. And then, do you have any remaining final thoughts or messages that you'd like to leave us with today, Mangala?
I would just say, like, if I think, well, okay, what's really alive right now with all of my clients is the state of the world right now. We can't ignore what's going on out there, and pleasure is not a luxury. This is essential. We need it as a resource. We need it to cultivate resilience. We need it in order to be able to cope with everything that's going on internally, externally. So please do not neglect your pleasure. Please don't think it's a luxury. It's absolutely essential.
Beautifully said. Thank you so much for leaving us with that message. And I really appreciate you joining me on the Shame Free Sex podcast today. It was so wonderful speaking with you, Mangala.
Oh, thank you so much. It's a delight. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a delight as usual. I'm always so excited to talk with you. And to our shame-free listeners, thank you for being here with us today and taking one more step to embracing your most authentic shame-free self. Stay sexy, stay safe, stay curious. Take care, everyone. Explore more at shamefreesex.com. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe so that you never miss out on another episode. Bye, everyone.